Welcome back, survivor. If you can hear this, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and this is your next story. I walked into the bay a little before changeover because I wanted the first cup of coffee from the pot. The garage doors were up. The air felt sticky from the storm that never arrived. Our rig sat in the first slot with the back doors open and the stretcher locked in place. My partner, Nina, was sorting trauma shears into a pouch by size. She said the supply cabinet was a mess again. I said I would fix it after we cleared morning checks. The radio on the wall spat out a call for another unit, a fall injury on West Maple. Nothing out of the ordinary. We had gone a full week without anything wild. Only routine chest pain, a scary asthma flare, the usual noise of a city rolling forward. We signed in. I scanned the drug box, counted vials, checked dates, sealed it again, and wrote the number on the log. Oxygen levels looked good. Portable suction, good. Monitor charged. I ran a quick self-test. Blood pressure cuff inflated and hissed down fine. The cot battery showed full bars. I held the stretcher rails and bounced them once. Solid. The smell of disinfectant clung to everything. Dispatch told us to stand by. I warmed my coffee in my hands and watched a flock of birds wheel past the open bay. A stray dog trotted by on the street, head down, tail tucked. The city never stopped moving. Even quiet had motion under it. The tone dropped. A long double chirp that cut across the room. Unit 14, domestic disturbance with injury, police on scene. Caller reports severe lacerations, possible arterial bleed. Address follows. The address landed in the tablet. A second later, a note. Caller now reports subject combative. Use caution. We snapped the doors shut, rolled forward, and pulled out into the afternoon traffic. The street felt strained, more horns than usual. A few drivers cutting weird lines through the lanes. Siren on. The engine hummed. I watched numbers stack on the monitor screen. No patients yet, and still the machine tracked my breathing from habit. We hit the block and saw 2 patrol cars crooked across the curb with doors open. A third car idled in the street with its lights on, but no one inside. Neighbors stood behind a hedge, faces tight, phones up. A woman waved her arm and shouted that the door was open and to be careful. I told Nina I would take first in and asked her to bring the airway bag and monitor. She nodded once. We rolled the stretcher up the walk. Inside the apartment, the living room looked torn up, a coffee table on its side, a lamp smashed. 2 officers had a man pressed against the wall near the hallway. His t-shirt was soaked through at the collar and his arms were slick with blood. His skin looked grey and patchy, paws standing out like grit. His eyes did not track the movement in the room. They stared at the ceiling, unfocused. He pushed into the officers with steady force. Not wild, just relentless. The third officer stood near the kitchen with a hand over a wound on his forearm. The hand under his palm was soaked and dripping on the tile. He tried to make a knot with a belt one-handed and could not get it to hold. On the floor beside the couch lay a woman in a dress that was half shredded at the shoulder. The skin under the torn fabric was open in a crescent, edges ragged, not clean. Blood pooled under her, but not the kind of flood that means no chance. The room had that sharp iron smell that ends any guesswork. I dropped to a knee, gloved up, and called to her. No response. Air movement at her nose, shallow, pupils midline. I called to Nina for the dressings. I clamped gauze on the worst part of the wound, then more gauze on top of that, and wrapped the shoulder with a pressure bandage. The edges of the bite oozed through the cloth. I told myself to wrap tighter and stop staring at the shape of it. The woman's breath grew stronger once the pressure took. I asked her name and told her mine. Her eyes fluttered. Her right hand grabbed for my sleeve without focus and then let go again. I saw a bruise the size of a fist along her jaw. The pattern did not match a fall. The line from smallest decisions to dying can be short. None of that helped now. My job was to move her and keep her breathing. Behind me, the man shoved the officers into the drywall hard enough to punch a hole. I heard the crunch. One officer told him to stop and got no reaction. No words from the man, only breath through an open mouth. Nina planted the monitor leads by the door and slid the head of the stretcher toward me. We counted, and lifted the woman onto the board, then onto the cot. The strap clicked across her chest. I told Nina to take the head while I held pressure on the shoulder and guided the cot. The officer with the bitten arm staggered and leaned on the wall. I moved toward him to wrap the arm. He pulled back and said he was fine. His face said he was not fine. I told him I needed to tie that off, or he would be lightheaded in 1 minute. He nodded and let me work. The bite ridges looked deep. I did not say the word bite out loud. The man pinned to the wall made a deep throat sound and bucked both officers off him. He stepped onto the coffee table and snapped it under his feet. His eyes finally moved, not toward the door, not toward escape, but toward the stretcher. He swung his head and fixed on the woman. He walked in a straight line at a steady pace. One officer shot a taser, barbs hitting the chest. The man toppled and lay still for a few seconds. Then he started to get up again, with the wires still in him, pulling the leads tight enough to drag the taser across the floor. The second officer tried to hold him, but there was no coordination left in the man's body. It moved with an odd rhythm, not slow, not fast, only forward. I yelled to Nina to go. We pushed the stretcher through the door and out into the sun. The neighbors gasped. Someone cried out and covered a child's eyes. I hated that detail because it meant we were not hiding anything anymore. We loaded fast. The cot locked to the rail with a solid clack. I took the bench seat. Nina slid behind the wheel and radioed our destination and the code for life-threatening trauma. The officers dragged the man back into the apartment. The bitten officer waved us off and said he would follow. The woman's heart rate bounced between high and higher. Oxygen on, 2 liters by cannula. I kept pressure on the shoulder and checked for other wounds. None that I could see. I ran through my script in my head and kept my hands moving. The apartment door scene kept replaying behind my eyes. That slow, steady walk, that empty focus. I shut it off and stayed with the numbers on the monitor. Halfway to the hospital, the woman's eyes snapped open. The movement was sudden and complete. 1 second barely there, the next second fully awake. She grabbed my wrist. Her grip was fierce. She stared past me and started to sit up. The stretcher strap caught across her chest and held her. She did not respond to her name. I said it again. Nothing. Her pupils were wide and did not react to the cabin light. She made a sound that strained her throat. Not a word. A raw sound. Steady, full of effort and nothing else. I told Nina to step on it. She said traffic was tight and asked for clearance on the radio. The radio answered with scattered voices. A voice I did not recognize told units to avoid St. Gertrude due to a security incident in the emergency department. Another voice tried to give a report over the top of that. I could not follow the thread. The woman kept pushing against the belt. I tightened it 1 notch. She snapped at my hand. Teeth met the air where my glove had been. I pulled back, pressed the call button, and told the hospital we had a combative trauma patient with altered mental status and a bleeding shoulder. The voice on the hospital feed told me to hold outside the ambulance bay until security cleared us. I asked how long. No answer. The line stayed open. Voices overlapped. A siren on top of another siren made the speaker crackle. I reached for restraints. We do not use them often. When we do, it is for safety. I told the patient exactly what I was doing, because that is the standard, even when a patient cannot respond. I secured her wrist to the cot side rails, then her ankles. She twisted against the straps, pulling so hard her knuckles blanched white. No pain response, only force. We hit the turn into the hospital campus and nearly stopped in place. Cars clogged every lane with hazards blinking. People stood outside their vehicles. Some waved for us to stop. One man tried to grab our door, and I had to slap the handle lock. His face looked drained. His shirt was stained, and I could not tell if he was hurt or if he had helped someone who was. He shouted that the hospital would not let anyone in. Nina eased the rig forward inch by inch, horn pulsing. Security waved us toward the far entrance. The main bay doors were closed and dark. We pulled to the auxiliary bay. A nurse in scrubs and a security guard met us with a gurney. The nurse's mask hung loose on one ear. Her hands shook. She said they had to route everything through decon because the main floor was shut. I told her the patient was combative and tied down. She said fine, Get her inside now. We would sort it out on the fly. We unlocked the cot and rolled. Inside the corridor, alarms sounded from every direction. Too many tones for any one person to process. The overhead lights cut out for a second, came back, cut out again, and finally steadied on emergency power. The nurse led us through a double door into a clean room that did not look ready for this. A plastic curtain separated the space into 2 lanes. On the far side, another patient flailed on a bed, while 2 nurses tried to get a cuff on an arm that would not stay still. We locked our cot down. I gave a quick report in short phrases. The nurse said the trauma surgeon was in the main elevator bank and could not get out. I asked about the security incident I heard on the radio. She glanced at the guard and told me the emergency department doors had closed due to a violent incident. She would not call it anything else. Only violent incident. I heard a shout from the hallway behind us, and then a sound that had no place in a hospital. The dull thud of bodies striking against something solid again and again with the same rhythm. The woman on our cot jerked her head toward that sound, and answered with a sound of her own. The hairs on my arm stood up and I forced my mind back into protocol. I checked her airway again, checked breathing, checked the bleeding, wrote numbers on the glove on my left hand, because the clipboard sat under a tray, and I did not want to look away. Nina stood at my shoulder and watched the hall with the guard. The guard tightened his grip on his baton and took 1 step toward the door. The door banged open, and a man in a hospital gown staggered in. His gown was dark at the chest and open in the back. His skin tone matched the man in the apartment, that same drained, patchy color that never shows on healthy people. He walked forward and slammed his shoulder into the wall and then into the edge of our cot. He did not look at us. He looked past us. The guard told him to stop. He did not stop. The guard pushed him back. The man returned to the same line and hit the cot again. He grabbed the railing and bit the air near my forearm. His teeth clacked and scraped the metal. I pulled my arms in and snapped the safety up around the patient's shoulder. The nurse yelled for help. Another nurse appeared, then vanished again. The hallway filled with the sound of running feet. I saw 4 new faces come and go in seconds. No one carried a plan. Everyone reacted to the next shape that moved. The security guard dragged the man in the gown toward the door. The man twisted and grabbed a handful of the guard's jacket. The guard hit him with a short baton swing and knocked him off balance. It did not register with the man. There was no startle, no flinch, no change. Only forward. The woman on our cot tore the strap at her right wrist. The stitching gave with a ripping sound. Her hand shot free and clamped my sleeve. She tried to pull my arm to her mouth and could not reach. I stepped out of range and grabbed for the strap. Nina moved in and pinned the woman's forearm. We wrestled the strap back around her wrist and doubled it with tape until it dug into itself. She twisted again, and I used another strap across her forearms. The nurse asked whether we had sedatives. I said our protocol required a physician order for this specific presentation. The nurse stared at me as if I had spoken a joke. I hated that I needed to say it at all, but that had been the rule up until this minute. Then the nurse said in a flat voice, to administer what we would use for violent agitation because someone needed to keep the patient from tearing free. I drew up a dose and gave it intramuscular in the thigh. The needle met dense muscle. The patient's skin felt cold. A second later, the breaker tripped. The room fell into silence, except for the sounds people make when they are scared and trying not to show it. Emergency lights kicked in again after a beat. The nurse pushed on the panel and cursed under her breath in a controlled way that helped me more than any reassurance speech would have. Our patient's breathing slowed for a moment. Her head eased back into the pillow. The sedative bought us a little space, not much. I wrote the time of administration on my glove. I checked the pressure bandage. It held. Bleeding still seeped but did not spray. I told myself to keep going line by line and not look at the big picture. The big picture was a storm I could not change. A surgeon in a disposable cap pushed into the room and asked for a field report. I ran through it in a sentence. He wanted to move the woman to a trauma bay. The nurse told him the trauma doors were sealed and security refused to open them after what happened in there. He said what happened, and she would not answer. He looked at the guard. The guard's face closed up. The surgeon gave a small, despairing nod and said we would stabilize here and then wheel to radiology. I said, "What about police?" The surgeon said all calls were rolled to emergency channels and no one was answering that phone anymore. We started working. The nurse cut the patient's dress from the shoulder to the rib and cleaned the edges as well as she could. The wound looked wrong. The tissue around it had gone dark in a way that did not match the time elapsed. I have seen infections that spread fast, but not this fast. The surgeon saw it too and did not say anything. He set a clamp for a bleeder we had missed. I kept oxygen steady and watched the monitor. Heart rate down slightly. Pressure low but not crashing. The hallway echoed with another thud and a scream that cut off in the middle. The guard flicked his eyes that way and back. He said he needed to check the corridor and stepped out. I wanted him to stay and told myself it was not my call. We had work to do that he could not do. He left and took the baton, and the illusion of a solid wall with him. The woman's eyelids fluttered and then opened. The sedative should have held longer. It did not. She looked past the surgeon to the doorway and arched against the straps. Her breath came in short blasts with small pauses that had nothing to do with words. The surgeon reached to press her shoulder, and she turned her head and snapped at his hand. He pulled away fast. She strained hard enough to make the cot frame shift on the floor. The metal feet squealed. The nurse said she would get security back. She stepped into the hall and yelled a name. No answer. She yelled again and added please, which told me far more than a technical report ever could. She came back in, shut the door, and set the lock tab. Her hand shook on the latch. She looked at me and asked whether our unit had any restraints stronger than what we used. I said no. I said I could add more tape. She said do it. I told Nina to grab the spare belts from the equipment bag. She handed me two. I crossed them over the patient's chest and tightened them until the fabric creaked. The woman strained and yelled another raw sound that had no word inside it. The surgeon stood back and stared at her face for a long moment. He asked me how long this had been going on. I told him all of it began less than 1 hour ago. He pressed his lips together and nodded. And then, a crash hit the hallway door hard enough to pop the latch halfway. The nurse screamed and braced it with both hands. Something on the other side hit it again. The metal bent in the middle. A hand reached through the gap, pale and streaked. The fingers flexed and clawed at the air. The surgeon grabbed a rolling cart and shoved it against the door. I helped push it tight. The woman on the cot made the same sound again, echoing the thing on the other side of the door. My mouth went dry, and I could not fix it with any thought. From the far side of the room, the other patient in the second lane rolled off the bed and hit the floor. The nurse on that side cried out. The figure on the floor got to knees and then feet without any transition that looked human. The face turned our way. The eyes were wrong, wide and flat. No recognition, only target. The patient stepped toward us with that same steady forward push that I had already seen 3 times today. The nurse backed into a cabinet and groped for something to hold. We could not hold the door and the oncoming patient at the same time. I moved for the extinguisher mounted by the sink. I pulled it free, yanked the pin, and held it in both hands. The patient kept advancing. I shouted to stop. No effect. I aimed at the chest and squeezed. The white cloud hit and slowed the figure for a second. The person wiped at the face, then kept coming. I swung the cylinder into the midsection with all the force I had. The blow folded the patient enough to knock it back. It stood up again with no sound. I hit it again, lower, and it dropped to a knee. The nurse darted around the other side and ran for the door to the imaging hall. She punched a code and pulled it open. She yelled for us to move through. The door behind us shuddered. The gap widened. A second set of hands squeezed through. The cart shifted. We had to give up this room or get crushed in it. The surgeon looked at the cot. He looked at the patient. He made a decision I did not want to make. He said we would leave the cot for now and come back with help and a gurney if we could. I hated it. I also wanted to live. Nina met my eyes. We moved. We pushed through the imaging door. The nurse slammed it and locked it with a lever. The corridor on the other side was empty and quiet. A sign pointed to the service elevator. The lights hummed and the air felt cooler. My ears rang. and I could not tell whether it was the machines or my own body trying to keep up. We ran a short stretch, then slowed. Running in a hospital with a fire extinguisher in one hand and nowhere to go makes nonsense fast. The nurse led us to a door marked maintenance. Inside, a custodian stood with a radio pressed to his ear and a mop in his other hand. He stared at us because he had already seen too much and lacked room for any more. The nurse said we needed a path out that did not lead through the main emergency hall. He said the loading dock might be open because the gate had failed halfway down. The nurse asked whether any security was in there. He said he had not seen anyone in 10 minutes, and that worried him more than if someone had been screaming. We moved as a group. The maintenance corridor led through a long concrete hallway lined with carts of linen and crates of saline. I kept the extinguisher ready and watched the corners. We reached the service elevator. The nurse hit the call button. Nothing. She hit it again. The light blinked and then died. She swore under her breath. One short word without spice, the kind that keeps a person grounded. The custodian pointed to a stairwell. We took it down one flight. The door at the bottom opened onto the dock. The dock smelled of diesel and wet cardboard. The gate hung low, stuck at knee height. Sunlight spilled in through the gap. I could see the parking lot beyond, crowded with cars, some at odd angles, some idling with no one inside. A siren wailed somewhere beyond the lot. A small group of people stood by a pillar. They looked at us and started begging with their hands, palms out, "Help my mother, help my husband, help my child." I have heard those words my entire career. Usually they direct to one person, and we go to that person. Today the words came from all directions. No one wanted to hear anything except yes. None of us had that yes to give. A figure crawled under the gate from the outside. A man in a stained hoodie. He scraped his back on the metal and did not care. He stood and got his balance without looking at us. Then he came toward us at a steady pace. Not a run, not a drunk wobble. That same forward push. The custodian said that one had been circling outside for 10 minutes and would not leave. The nurse told him to stay behind us. Nina stood to my left. I raised the extinguisher again. The man walked into the foam without stopping. His eyes were wide and empty. His mouth worked. He reached. I swung. The metal rang off his shoulder and skull. He fell, rolled, and started to rise again. The nurse grabbed a pallet jack and rammed him in the ribs. He toppled against a stack of boxes and lay still for a few seconds. We took that window and slipped past the pillar and out into the lot. Outside, the heat pressed down. A helicopter chopped the air somewhere low and then banked away. A woman wearing a hospital gown and socks stood in the lane and stared at a line of trees as if the trees had spoken to her. A man in a suit paced next to a car with the trunk open, pulling bags out and dropping them on the ground. He looked at us with wet eyes and said, "Please." I shook my head once and kept moving. The nurse whispered that she had family on the other side of the old clinic and needed to check on them. I told her to go. She did not move. The custodian said he would escort her. He had keys to a door that cut through the rehab wing. I could not offer protection. I could only nod. They went. Nina and I aimed for the lane where we had left the rig. The main road was jammed, but a side route might still be open. As we cut through the lot, we passed an open ambulance with blood on the running board. No crew. The keys hung in the ignition. I looked inside. The drug box was gone. The monitor sat on the floor with the screen cracked. The cot had been halfway pulled out, then shoved back in at an angle. I wanted the simple feeling of order, and it was not available anywhere. We found our rig where we had left it, half blocked by a car abandoned at a diagonal. A woman stood by that car, rocking on her feet. She had both hands pressed over her mouth. She lowered them as we approached. Blood slicked her fingers. Not hers. The smear pattern was wrong on her skin. I asked whether she was hurt. She shook her head. She said her boyfriend had gone into the emergency department to find his father and had not come back. I asked when. She said 40 minutes ago. She asked me to drive her around the building. I told her to get in and sit on the step and hold onto the rail. She climbed onto the step. Her eyes did not leave the doors. Nina slid behind the wheel and lit the siren. The lane parted enough for us to creep through. I held onto the safety rail in back and watched the hospital doors as we moved. The glass reflected the sky, empty and bright. We rounded the corner. A group ran across the drive and tried to wave us down. One man chased us for 20 yards and then gave up, bending over with his hands on his knees. Another man behind him did not stop. He kept coming. He did not run, but he did not slow. His arms hung loose and his hands flexed and unflexed. A security truck cut in from a cross lane and tapped him with the bumper. He rolled onto the hood and into the windshield, spidering the glass. He bounced off, hit the ground, and then started to get up again. The driver honked and backed away, and then hit him again, harder. The body crumpled. The driver put the truck in park, stepped out and stared down. The body started to move again. The driver made a choice and drove over him. I heard the tires thump twice. The driver sat there for a second with his hands on the wheel, and then drove on. We looped the building and saw the main ambulance bay flooded with light and noise. The doors were down. A staff member stood inside, face to the glass, hands flat. She did not open the door. She made a small shake of the head. She was pale. She left bloody prints on the glass. Then she turned and ran deeper in. The woman on the step let out a sound that broke into two parts. She slid down off the step before I could grab her shoulder. She ran toward the door. I called her back. She did not stop. She banged on the glass and shouted names. Shapes moved inside the lobby. A janitor appeared and waved her away. She pounded harder and then put her forehead to the glass and cried. I could not pick her up and carry her away. I could only offer a ride and a small piece of advice she did not want. I told her we had to go. She did not answer. I told Nina to pull forward. The woman watched us leave with empty eyes and dropped to her knees on the sidewalk. We got out of the hospital zone and rolled toward the arterial. The city had changed in 1 hour. It did not look post-disaster. It looked mid-disaster. Sirens, stopped buses, drivers at a standstill, people in the street, voices layered into one long sheet of sound. The radio told us to return to service if available. Then it told us to stage at a police precinct. Then it told us to disregard that and stand by for instructions. We chose a path that kept us in motion. Motion felt safer than any line of text. We turned onto Park and saw a group surrounding a delivery truck. The driver sat inside and leaned on the horn. The group did not move away. A woman in a red coat slapped the hood with her palm again and again. A man in a ball cap tried to open the passenger door. He could not. He hit the window with his elbow and hurt himself, and hit it again anyway. Behind them, a figure in hospital pants shambled between cars and reached for anyone within reach. A jogger in bright shoes tried to dodge past and fell. The figure dropped on top of him. I told Nina to go. She threaded the rig between a van and a sedan, clipped the mirror on the van, and did not apologize. Dispatch cut in with a request. Unit 14, respond to a priority 1 at Charter Towers. Multiple injuries. Police en route. The address sat in my tablet in a flash. Charter Towers was a senior housing building 6 blocks away. I looked at Nina. She nodded. We rolled. Outside the towers, the entry drive was full of people trying to leave and people trying to get in. 2 security guards waved their arms and failed to create order. I spotted a woman on the ground near the front doors. Blood pooled under her. A man in a maintenance shirt knelt beside her and pressed a towel to her neck. I jumped out with the jump bag and ran. He looked up at me with a face that had already fallen apart. He said the elevator doors opened and 2 residents staggered out together, and one of them bit this woman. He kept saying the word bit. He could not stop saying it. I took over the pressure on the neck. The wound was devastating at first glance, and still I made my hands move. The woman gurgled and tried to talk. I told her to hold still and focus on the ceiling. She did not. She clawed at her own chest and then at my sleeve. Then her hand went slack. I checked the carotid and heard my own breath block everything for a second. Nothing. I grabbed the bag valve mask. Nina brought the portable oxygen and the monitor. We worked for 2 minutes. The words I knew and used all my life did not match anything. I stopped. I let go because there was no more to do. I hate that point every time. This time I hated it more because the cause sat right there in the lobby with a red smear around a man's mouth and no expression. I stood and pointed. The man with the mouth smear stared at us through the glass and then started forward. The automatic doors were jammed. He bumped the metal and then wedged his fingers into the seam. His nails scraped and bled without changing how he worked. A second person appeared behind him and pushed into his back. Then, a third. The door held for a few seconds and then rolled open. The group came through in a rush. Not a run, just a press. Security shouted and swung batons. The people did not stop. Nina yelled to move. I grabbed the jump bag, and we ran backward toward the rig. The maintenance man tried to pull the dead woman up by her shoulder. I told him to let her go, and he did not understand. He shouted that we could not leave her there. He was not wrong. He also lacked the option to be right. A man in a blue jacket reached the maintenance man and grabbed his sleeve. The maintenance man shook him off. The man in the blue jacket grabbed again, harder. The security guard hit the man in the blue jacket with a baton and failed to move him. The blue jacket man turned and bit the guard in the hand and then kept hold of the sleeve with his teeth. The guard screamed and pulled free and left skin behind. We hit the rig and slammed the doors. Nina gunned the engine. A figure banged into the side panel and left a streak. We pulled away. A woman pounded the back doors with both fists and shouted the words, "Please and help and do not leave." I swallowed and told myself I would break if I looked over my shoulder again. I stared at the monitor instead and watched my own reflection in the dark screen. I could not stand that either. We cut south and found a clear stretch, then hit a wall of cars 3 blocks later. Helicopters crisscrossed the sky now. One of them hung lower than it should have and wobbled. It straightened, then dropped behind a line of buildings and vanished. A column of smoke rose a minute later. No boom reached us, only a change in the noise of the day, more crackle than hum. The radio switched to an all-call. A voice told every unit to return to quarters if safe to do so. Another voice came over the top and told units to stage at the convention center. A third voice said the convention center was no longer safe. The dispatcher repeated the return to quarters order with the kind of tone supervisors use when trying to project control. Nina asked me what I thought. I said the station had a fence and a generator and a stock of food that would last 2 days if no one panicked. It sounded better than the street. She nodded and angled toward home. We made 2 blocks. A man in a white coat stepped out in front of us, arms wide. Nina braked. He came to my window and pounded it with his palm. I cracked it an inch. He shouted that he was a doctor and needed a ride to the hospital. I told him the hospital was closed. He said that made no sense. I told him it made all the sense in the world right now. He tried to open the door. It was locked. I told him to move. He did not. A woman in grey scrubs came up behind him and grabbed his sleeve. He jerked his arm away and barked at her. He did not see the figure in the crosswalk moving toward him. The scrubs woman did. She pulled the doctor by the collar, and he swore at her and swung an elbow. It hit her cheek. She fell. The figure reached the doctor and latched onto his neck, teeth first. He screamed. The sound cut quick when the teeth found something. The scrubs woman sat up and stared, both hands to her face. She did not make a sound. I told Nina to go. She did. The doctor's body slid off our bumper and vanished under the wheels of the car behind us. I cannot pretend that away. It happened. We reached the station from the rear, through the alley, because a delivery truck had jackknifed across the front entrance. The bay doors were still open. 2 other rigs sat inside. I saw faces. Relief hit me, and then tipped into worry because too many faces stared with the same blank shock. The captain stood with a clipboard and a radio and a baseball bat. He had traded his pen for something that did not help with paperwork. We parked and climbed out. The room smelled like bleach and stress. The captain asked for a sit rep. I gave him the bullet list. Apartment scene, bite wound, combative subject, hospital closure, violent incidents. He did not blink. He said he had similar from 2 other crews and worse from a third. He said one team had not checked in for 40 minutes. He had sent a unit to look for them, and that unit had called in a mayday and then went silent. He said the radio was useless for anything except noise, and he told us to switch to hand signals if needed. He told us to arm ourselves with anything available that would not break in our hands. In the next 10 minutes we turned the station into a place that might hold. The doors came down. A metal bar ran through the handle braces. Fire axes leaned at every corner. We threw a chain through the side door and padlocked it. Someone shut off the fuel pumps outside and moved the spare cans into the gear room. We hauled cases of bottled water into a stack and taped a line on the floor to keep traffic clear. A pounding started on the front door, slow and steady, no voice, no words. The sound put a cold film over everything. The captain told everyone to ignore it. He pulled us into the briefing area and spoke in a voice that cut through the noise. He said we would not abandon people if we could help them. He also said we would not open the door without a plan. The grief in the room had edges. It took effort not to cut ourselves on it. We heard a scream from the alley, a real voice this time. A woman calling for help. We ran to the side window. A nurse from our hospital stood there with her hands up. I recognized her from earlier. She had helped us in decon. She had a rip across her sleeve and blood on her shoulder. She saw our faces in the glass and started sobbing with relief. The captain unlocked the side door and let her in fast, then locked it again. She could not stop talking for a minute. She said she had lost her friend at the dock and had run through the rehab wing and out the back. She said the hallways were full of people attacking anyone they saw, with no words and no pause. She said she had never seen anything like it. We gave her water and sat her down. The pounding on the front door continued. A window on the second level gave us a view of the street. I climbed the stairs and looked. 3 figures stood at the glass. A man and 2 women. They moved their hands against the door in a slow, repeated push. No speech, no shout. They did not tire. More figures moved on the sidewalk. Same pace, same aim. A car drove through the intersection and hit one of them. The body bounced over the hood, slid off, and began to get up again. The driver floored it and clipped a hydrant. Water fountained into the air. No one came to shut it off. We formed a plan on the fly. If we saw someone uninfected and able to run, we would crack the side door a foot for 10 seconds and pull that person inside and lock the door again. We would not fight the crowd. We would not go out unless a firefighter crew joined us to clear a path. We would rotate door duty so no one frayed. The captain said it all in a firm tone that held the room together one more time. 2 hours passed. The light outside shifted toward evening and turned the bay door windows into mirrors. The pounding never stopped. It faded and swelled and faded again. We brought the rigs into a tighter line to create a barricade inside the building. A crew returned from the north with a broken windshield and a story about a bridge jammed with cars and a bus at a right angle across both lanes. A third crew did not come back. No one said their names out loud. We ate granola bars and drank water and used the bathroom in pairs. No one wanted to stand alone in a stall with a thin lock between a body and a nightmare. Sounds travel through that kind of thin wall. I splashed water on my face and stared at my eyes in the mirror. I did not recognize them. I told myself to stand up straight and keep moving. That instruction worked for 12 seconds at a time. A man with a blood-soaked shirt staggered into the alley and started pounding the side door. He yelled full words. He begged. He said he had a child in the car. The captain ran to the window and looked out. The man did not have a child with him. The car sat empty. The pounding on the front door swelled again, in the same rhythm as before. The captain hesitated. The man banged harder and cried. The nurse who had just come in said she knew that man from the hospital cafeteria. She said he was kind. The captain made the call and unlocked the door. The man rushed in and collapsed onto the floor. We pulled him away from the door and locked it again. He took 2 ragged breaths and passed out cold. We slid him onto a backboard and checked him end to end. No bites. Deep gash on the shoulder from glass. I cleaned it and wrapped it. He woke up and asked for his daughter again. I asked where she was. He said she was at school. He said he had tried to get to her, and the roads had closed, and he had run out of fuel, and had run on foot. He said he had seen a man chewing on another man in the middle of the street and he could not stop it. He said he had tried to pull the attacker off and had been thrown into a fence by a person with a stare that was not a stare. He said he had run here because he knew this place was solid. He shook and I put my hand on his shoulder and told him to breathe in, breathe out, and anchor to the room. He did. Night settled. The sound of helicopters faded. The city lights flickered and died in sections. The horizon went patchy and then dark. Our generator took the load. The emergency lights cast a steady dull glow. The bay felt small and safe, and I knew it was not safe at all, only less exposed. The pounding on the front door stopped for the first time since afternoon. The sudden quiet made my skin feel too tight. We all froze and listened. Nothing. That nothing had weight. The captain motioned for me and Nina to join him at the second-floor window. We crept up and peered down. The street was empty. No bodies, no walkers, no drivers idling at the light. The hydrant still sprayed water across the curb. It looked almost normal in that single way, and that made it worse. The captain said we should use the gap to move 2 rigs into the inner bay and close the outer doors. That would give us a double wall. He called for volunteers. My hand went up before my mind caught it. Nina's hand went up too. He nodded. He handed me a radio and said one word: quick. We opened the inner door to the outside lane and rolled the first rig forward 10 feet. The air outside felt heavy and stale. I climbed into the cab and turned the key. The engine fired. I inched the rig ahead and pivoted it into the inner bay. Nina guided me with hand signals. The captain held a bat in one hand and a flashlight in the other and scanned the street. No movement. We parked the rig and went for the second one. We had the second rig halfway into the bay when a shape appeared at the far end of the block. Then another. Then 3 more in a line. They drifted into the light in silence. The captain hissed for us to hurry. My hands felt slow and thick. Nina waved me back and to the side, back and to the side. The shapes advanced. 20 yards, 15, 10. Faces became faces. Eyes dead and bright at the same time. Hands reaching, mouths working. No speech. The captain shouted, and the inner door rolled down. The rig cleared by inches. The door hit the floor with a slam. A second later, bodies hit the outside of the door with a heavy thud. The metal shuddered. Dust shook from the tracks. The sound had weight that went right through my feet and into my spine. We held our breath. The door flexed but held. We stood there staring at the door for a long minute. Then we moved in a fast burst, locking latches and dropping bars and setting wedges. We backed the rigs into tight positions and killed the engines. The bay settled into a hum from the generator and our own breathing. The captain called us together and spoke low. He said we had done what we could for today. He said we would assign watches in pairs through the night. He said the morning would look different and maybe worse, and we would form a plan after we saw it. He told us to drink water and sit down for 5 minutes, and then volunteer for the first watch. 10 hands went up and he picked 2 pairs and told the rest to sleep if they could. I did not sleep. I sat on the step by our rig with a blanket around my shoulders and watched the shadows at the door seam. My body refused to quiet. Every small sound had meaning now. A drip in the sink meant a leak that needed fixing before water ran out. A rustle at the back of the bay might be a rat or a loose wrapper or a person we had missed. I got up and checked. It was a wrapper. I picked it up because it seemed obscene to leave trash on the floor while the city fell apart outside. Sometime after midnight, the radio crackled again. A voice called our station number. It was someone from Fire 2. He said their house had been breached. He said 3 of his crew were down and the rest were heading for the river. His voice broke once and then steadied. He said if anyone made it to dawn, to meet at the old train station's south entrance. He repeated it twice, and then the radio cut to static. The captain wrote the plan on the whiteboard. The pen squeaked. The sound had more clarity than any speech all day. Nina sat next to me and handed me half a protein bar. I ate it without tasting it. I asked if she had anyone she needed to check on. She said her mother lived 2 states away, and she had texted in the morning and got a heart emoji back, which was the same as any normal day, so it gave comfort and no information. I said my father lived across town, and I had not called, because I did not know what I would do with the answer. She nodded. We passed the bottle of water back and forth without talking more. Some bonds do not need words. They need standing next to a person when the door shakes. Around 2 in the morning, a steady tapping began on the side door. Not pounding. Tapping. A pattern. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Pause. 3. The captain raised a hand for silence. The tapping repeated. He walked to the door and put his ear to it. He asked who it was. A voice said a name. It was the name of our crew that had gone silent earlier. The captain's face changed. He looked at me, and then at the nurse from the hospital. The nurse swallowed and nodded. We unlocked the door and cracked it 2 inches. The face at the gap belonged to our missing driver, Raoul. He was pale and sweating. His eyes were focused and human. He said his partner had gone down and he had run. He asked to come in. The captain asked about bites. Raoul showed his arms. No bites. He held his shirt up. No bites. He pulled up his pant legs. A scrape from a fall, nothing more. We let him in. He staggered and grabbed the bench. He started to cry in a low, steady way, as if a dam had a controlled leak. The nurse put a hand on his shoulder. He told a clipped story with stops and starts. A call to a grocery store. A fight over a cart. A person with grey skin moving through the aisle without aiming for food. Only people. His partner had tried to pull a teenager away and got swarmed. The faces that swarmed had no hate in them, only intent. Raoul had swung a wrench and missed and then run because he wanted to live. He hated himself for running and kept breathing anyway. We gave him water and a blanket and a corner. He slept for 10 minutes and then woke with a jerk and apologized. No one asked him to rest again. When a person's mind is full, sleep becomes a stranger. He sat with me on the step and stared at the door seam. We did not talk. We waited. Near dawn, the generator coughed and came back. The captain said fuel had dipped and we would shut it down at daylight to conserve. That meant less light and more quiet. The quiet would be both relief and exposure. We moved in a slow routine and tidied gear and checked the rigs. Routine holds the mind steady. We leaned on it. Light seeped around the edges of the bay doors. The shapes under the seam sharpened. We heard shuffling and faint scrapes. A face pressed to the gap with an eye peering in. The eye rolled slowly along the line, then moved away. A low murmur rolled through the group outside and then faded. I looked at Nina. She looked back. The day would be worse than the night. We both knew it. The captain gathered us again and pointed to the map on the wall. He traced a route with his finger from the station down 2 side streets to the old train station. He said we would take 1 rig, packed tight, and push through slowly. He said we would not stop for anyone unless that person was a child alone or a partner in uniform. He said none of that felt good, and all of it extended the lives of the people in this room. He asked for objections. No one spoke. He picked seats. He put me behind the driver with the extinguisher and the pry bar. He put Nina at the wheel. He put Raoul on the radio. The nurse sat behind me with a medical kit. The man from the alley asked to come. The captain looked at him for a long second and then nodded. We rolled the inner door up and 3 bodies slumped against the outer door. The smell hit, stale and sweet. We raised the outer door a foot, then 2. Feet shuffled, faces pressed close, mouths working. The captain said now. Nina drove hard enough to shove bodies aside without losing control. We hit the street. Shapes turned toward us from both sidewalks. We did not stop. Maple was blocked by a city bus pinned at an angle with the doors open and no driver. A body lay across the top step, another shape moving inside. We cut down Birch. A kid on a BMX bike sprinted from a side yard, maybe 12, eyes clear. He waved and begged to get in. The captain cracked the side door and asked about a parent. The kid said his father was gone. The captain told him to climb in. He collapsed on the floor and cried. I gripped his shoulder, and he held my wrist with both hands. Doors shut. We moved. 3 figures in hospital gowns stepped out between parked cars. One pounded our side panel hard enough to flex the metal. A man in a work vest swung a shovel and missed. The figure grabbed the wood. He braced and pushed and yelled for help. No one could reach him without giving up space and motion. We kept moving. I watched him in the mirror until the corner took him out of sight. The old train station rose out of the haze. Inside, someone had sprayed on the wall. We slid down the service ramp. Fire 2 stepped from behind a pillar with hands up. The lieutenant had a split lip and dark eyes. He touched our hood and held there a second, then waved us to park. The loading area smelled of oil and dust. A dozen people stood in a loose circle. Firefighters, 2 nurses, a transit cop, a janitor, an old man in a suit, a teen with a backpack, a woman with a sleeping infant. A plan was taped to a pillar. Find water, find fuel, hold until noon, decide. Short plan, clear steps. We pooled gear and food, taped glow sticks along the floor to the bathrooms and the stairwell, posted lookouts at the ramp and stairs, cleared a corner for medical. The nurse from our hospital ran it. I cleaned cuts, taped sprains, reset the transit cop's finger with a quick pull. Raoul tightened a loose generator lead. Nina slept sitting up for 15 minutes and woke sharp. Around 10, a couple crept down the ramp with shirts over their faces. The man held a pipe, the woman a backpack. They said the tunnel held eyes. The transit cop said the tunnels were full of pockets of people, some already lost. Avoid unless there was no other path. We argued in low voices. Stay or move. The captain wanted daylight for travel. Fire 2's lieutenant wanted to fortify and scout. The nurse pointed to the infant and 3 others fading. The old man offered nothing useful. The teen watched the ramp and promised to hold the post. The kid from the bike drank small sips and stared at his shoes. I re-inventoried meds and found 2 more rolls of gauze. It helped to find anything that worked. Near noon, a woman in a long coat appeared at the top of the ramp. The lookout called to her. No answer. She came on. We fell back behind the rig. She reached the loading area. Same empty eyes as the others. The transit cop struck her thigh with a baton, then higher. She kept coming. The captain smashed her shins with a length of pipe. She fell to hands and knees and crawled toward the infant. The mother stepped back. The nurse blasted her with a fire extinguisher. She still lunged. The captain brought the pipe down and stopped her. We dragged the body to the sun and covered it with a tarp we could not spare. The vote ended. Move at 1 in the afternoon. 1 ambulance and 1 pickup. Only essentials. South Edge, the bridge, the highway. Decide after. I took a minute on the bumper, then went back to work. Airway bag, trauma bag, drug box. Dosages on a strip of tape stuck to my thigh. Fresh cannulas. Extra gloves in pockets. Trauma shears cleaned. If the world is messy, the kit cannot be. At 1, we climbed the ramp in tight formation. The kid buckled on the bench, eyes down. The mother and infant in the pickup between 2 firefighters. The old man behind the captain with both hands on the seat. The nurse crouched by the side door with a tourniquet ready. Raoul worked the radio. Nina's hands at 10 and 2. The street was half empty. We turned right, then left, and reached the bridge. Cars sat locked in place. A delivery van blocked the far lane. A police cruiser sat dead at center. Figures clung to a city bus and beat the glass. The driver slumped over the wheel. We took the walkway lane. Mirrors brushed the railing. A figure lunged from behind the cruiser and grabbed the handle. I cracked the door and slammed the pry bar across the wrist. Bones gave. The hand dropped. The other hand reached. I struck the forearm and it slid away. We kept moving. Halfway over, a private ambulance on the far side wedged on a barrier. A crowd swarmed it. The driver swung a crowbar from the step. The partner inside held an infant and yelled. The driver slipped and fell. The partner slammed the door, jumped into the seat, and jammed the rig into reverse. Bodies caught under the bumper. The rig crushed into a sedan, popped free, and shot down an alley. The driver on the pavement did not move. The mother in our pickup pulled her infant tight and sobbed once. We crossed and dropped off the curb into a warehouse lot. We took a service road along the river. Trees blocked the street noise. The rig's hum steadied everything. The kid nodded off mid-sit and tipped into my lap. I propped him against the wall and covered him with a blanket. His breathing rose and fell in a clean rhythm. It helped. 20 minutes later, we cleared the last light. Fields, a silo, a farmhouse with plywood on the windows. No bodies, no cars. Engine, tires, birds. The sun glared. The normal view felt wrong, but it was real. We paused at a closed gas station with a wide lot and sightlines. Pumps off, door chained, a handwritten sign inside. Closed, family emergency. We parked nose out and set a perimeter. Fire 2 took north. We took east. The transit cop and the old man watched south. The nurse stayed center with the mother, infant, and sleeping kid. Raoul climbed on the pickup roof with binoculars. I stood with the bar and extinguisher and scanned the field. A hawk circled. A dog watched from the fence line. I asked the captain for the next step. County fairgrounds, perimeter fence, outbuildings, water hookup, known site for drills. If empty, take it. If occupied and friendly, help. If hostile, move on. We ate crackers and tuna and passed a sports drink. The kid woke, flinched, then settled. The mother fed the infant. The old man stretched and caught himself showing it. The nurse handed him water. He took it and gave a quiet nod. Far off, a column of smoke rose over the city. Sirens had thinned out. My head went back to the apartment, the coffee table on its side. The man who did not stop. The woman whose eyes snapped open. Hours to go from normal to this. We rolled in 10 minutes. On the county road, a minivan rushed up, tucked close, and flashed headlights. Raoul called for distance. No answer. The van crowded our lane. I slid the side door a hand width and held the extinguisher. The passenger leaned out with a pistol. The transit cop braced his own weapon low. The mother covered the infant. The kid slid under the bench. On the captain's count, Nina braked hard. The van shot ahead, swerved, overcorrected, clipped the pickup's front corner, spun across the lane, and buried its nose in a drainage ditch. The pistol flew into grass. The driver crawled out, staggered, and threw an arm at us in blame. We kept moving. He had turned a road into a threat. We had not. The fairgrounds gate stood open. No bodies, no cars. Empty barns, empty stands, shutters down at concessions. An old banner still hanging. We parked under the grandstand for shade, chained the gate, posted roof and gate watches, set a small camp with a table and a line for towels. Not a home. A pause. I sat on a cooler and wrote on the back of a form. Date, first day, the apartment address, the wound, the decon room, the surgeon who would not say outbreak, the station plan, the bridge, the minivan, the fairgrounds, the names of the people with us. The page looked crowded and still too small. As the sun dropped, a car stopped outside the gate. 2 people got out. The man raised empty hands and shouted that his wife was in labor. We verified from the fence. He turned in a circle, clean and shaking, then opened the back door. She sat inside, belly high, groaning. Real labor. We opened up and brought them in. The nurse took lead. I checked the fetal Doppler and heard a steady heartbeat. Water, towels, clean sheets, calm words. The husband stayed with her the whole time. The baby arrived near sunset. No warmer, just blanket and skin, and the mother's chest. A thin cry, then steady breathing. No cheers, smiles around the circle. The mother laughed once and cried. The father pressed his forehead to hers. The nurse counted and nodded. I nodded back. Real life in the middle of a hard day. We washed up, counted water, set a night schedule. No one walked alone. We folded the tarp from the ramp and put it away. No one spoke about it. I took a bench under the stands, slept in short drops, woke to small noises. The generator hummed. Coyotes called far off. The infant cried twice, then slept. The mother sang a low line. The father took first watch and stared at the gate and the road. I counted the hours from the first call to now. A domestic, a bite, a man who would not stop, a woman who changed, a hospital that closed, a city that tipped, a station that held, a bridge, a convoy, a minivan, a fairground, a birth. Dawn touched the track. I walked the fence with the captain. He said day 2 would be worse and better. Worse because now we understood the threat. Better because we had a place to stand and a shared language. Move after breakfast. Search. Bring in who we can. Set rules that keep people breathing. I opened my notebook and wrote one more line. We survived the first day. I underlined it once, closed the book, checked the bags, bottles and belts, and met Nina's eyes. She nodded. We had work to do, and now we had a plan to do it. That's all for now, survivor. Thanks for listening. If you want to keep these stories alive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. And a huge thank you to everyone supporting this channel with extra memberships, especially Rangers and Legends, Carlos Herrera, Luca Mod. Thanks. Also drop a comment and let me know what story you want to hear next. Jack's Nightmares signing off.